West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
The House committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol is now laying out the case for its contempt of Congress charge against Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, including how the committee wanted to question him over an email that he sent the day before the attack saying that the National Guard would be used to, quote, protect pro-Trump people. Meadows is obviously no longer cooperating, and the committee is slated to vote today to recommend a contempt of Congress charge against him. CNN's Whitney Wild is in Washington. Whitney, what did we learn from this new 51-page document that came out overnight?
Well, this is really giving a lot of color to the extent to which the former chief of staff went to try to utilize basically every avenue he felt like was available to him to try to overturn the election, largely because that's what the president wanted. So let's go back to this January 5th email. This is one of the key findings here. Again, a January 5th email in which the former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, said this: the National Guard would be present to protect pro-Trump people, and that many more would be available on standby. That's significant, Caitlin, because what we know is that the National Guard did not arrive to the Capitol until hours after the fighting began, and there continue to be questions about who made those decisions, how they were made, and what was basically responsible for the time lag between when the initial request was made and when the National Guard ended up being activated and finally making its way to the Capitol. I mean, there are a ton of revelations in this resolution. There's another one about Mark Meadows' communications with members of Congress about appointing an alternate slate of electors that would, in effect, nullify the votes from their areas, which would, in turn, overturn the election. So here's just a little snippet of that section from the resolution. Received text messages and emails regarding apparent efforts to encourage Republican legislators in certain states to send alternate slates of electors to Congress, a plan in which one member of Congress acknowledged was, quote, highly controversial, and to which Mark Meadows responded, I love it. So there continue to be more and more examples of what we already know, that Mark Meadows went to great lengths to try to overturn the election. There are also new details about what was going on within the White House, within Trump's orbit on January 6th. And one of those revelations is that there was a media personality who encouraged the former president to put out a statement once the fighting was going on at the Capitol on January 6th, urging people to leave peacefully. Additionally, there was a communication between Mark Meadows and a rally organizer in which a rally organizer said to him, this is getting crazy. We really need to get some guidance here. I desperately need some guidance. And the resolution alludes to communications there. I mean, it just goes on and on. But ultimately, Caitlin, this is the committee's effort to try to get more information from Mark Meadows, especially about documents he's already provided. However, Mark Meadows contends that their request for information is overly broad, that it has no legitimate legislative purpose, a concept that courts have roundly rejected, Caitlin.
Yeah, of course, he's now saying that after he turned over these documents and these text messages. Whitney Wild, thank you so much. Joining us now is CNN legal and national security analyst Asha Rangappa. She's a former FBI special agent and lectures at Yale University. Asha, I just want to start, the broader picture of this, what Whitney was just laying out, how intertwined the former chief of staff was in the events leading up to that day when before it kind of seems like it's these shadowy figures outside the White House. You're seeing just how close it was inside the West Wing as they were planning this.
Yes, Caitlin. I think what the resolution makes clear is that Mark Meadows was kind of the ground zero for a lot of the different threads that were leading up to January 6th. They know, for example, that he was receiving and sending messages related to the National Guard, as we just heard, and the delay in deploying them, and the fact that they were assigned, I guess, to protect the people who are at the ellipse. But also the efforts to weaponize DOJ in terms of calling into question election results, also in terms of being in touch with the rally organizers. So he has a lot of information to give. And Caitlin, what I'll add here is the resolution makes clear that the committee already has a lot of information. They have a picture here, and they have very, very specific lines of questioning for Mark Meadows in which he'll have to name names and also provide the content of specific communications that he had with all of these people.
Well, and I'm wondering, what was your reaction to what we learned from this about the National Guard? The fact that Mark Meadows was saying that they would have the National Guard there to protect the pro-Trump people. I guess the question would be, protect him from whom, given they were the ones attacking the Capitol that day. But what other questions did this raise for you about how long it took to actually get the National Guard there?
Well, Caitlin, I would even rewind for one more loop. They actually contemplated the fact that the National Guard might be necessary. I mean, there's this building picture here that the idea that there would be some kind of big disruption on January 6th that might require a large law enforcement response, a National Guard response, tells us that they were anticipating something potentially violent, and that they were actually planning out, they were gaming out how to make this benefit Trump. But it does shed light on the fact that the delay in the deployment of the National Guard, was not just some kind of miscommunication, which it sounds like, until now, this has sort of been the narrative, but something that was more deliberate.
And what about this PowerPoint? I think this is something that everyone has been talking about. It is something that Mark Meadows turned over to the committee. His attorney said he just turned it over because it wasn't privileged. It was something he received but didn't do anything with. But this is deeply concerning because if you look at it, it's titled Election Fraud, Foreign Interference, and Options for January 6th. This was something that was sent to the chief of staff at the White House at the time. And of course, in part of it, it talks about declaring a national emergency when it comes to how they wanted to contest these results. And so Mark Meadows says he didn't actually do anything with this, but what did you read from the fact that he had this in his hands in the first place?
Yes, Caitlin, there is a lot of crazy in the PowerPoint, at least the version that's been circulating online. And I think what is striking about this is, again, that this was formalized. We've heard a lot of these conspiracy theories, sort of circulating about in different ways. This is compiled all together. And there was an intended audience for this. This was intended for everyone to get on the same page. And as you mentioned, there is a part in there about Trump declaring a national emergency. Now, Caitlin, declaring a national emergency triggers a lot of standby statutes. It gives the president a lot of extra power. So I think the question is, what was going to be the precipitating event that would allow the president to do this? Again, I think Mark Meadows, even if he didn't create this PowerPoint, has a lot of answers to these questions.
We now have this new resolution they want to do a contempt of Congress charge against the former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, who's no longer cooperating with the January 6th probe. And you saw overnight that there are these messages where he said that they were setting up for the National Guard to protect the pro-Trump people on January 6th. Of course, those were the people who were the ones attacking the Capitol. And so what stood out to you from this of what we learned about just how intertwined Mark Meadows was in helping the former president with these efforts? And
he was receiving in email this extraordinary PowerPoint describing how to essentially conduct a coup. The thing about Mark Meadows that I find so outrageous is that here's a guy who's writing a book about the events of January 6th, among other things, yet refusing to testify to Congress about the identical issues. Again, I think his legal position is weak, but the legal system moves slowly. And even if they pursue him for contempt, the odds that they will be able to use the legal system to force him to testify in any meaningful time period for this investigation, because, time is passing, I think is very low.
And when you talk to these officials and their associates on background and privately, they make that point. They say the longer this takes, the better it works out for us.
By the time you get to a district court, Circuit Court of Appeals, possible Supreme Court, you can see with the Bannon case, which is basically on a slow boat to nowhere, that's where they're all going to be on that boat.
It is Monday, the 13th of December of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays, because it's Monday. Okay, yeah, Monday. We're on our way to another week of mirth and well-being. Let's hope so. For the wellness of humanity. Yeah, came across that by the Honorable Charles Pierce. Had questioned the use of that term as applied to Elon Musk, because apparently Elon Musk is doing things, according to his sycophants. It's all for the wellness of humanity. What the F? I think the wellness of humanity needs more B12. And I would also add, anyone invoking the wellness of humanity, can the body thetans be far behind? And you know what I mean, if you're clear. Even if you're not. I don't mean to be, insulting to certain belief systems. But I am anyway. I don't mean to, but I'm going to anyway. All right. Well, it's Monday and we're on our way. Yeah. So what happened over the weekend? Lots. Okay. Yep. Well, on the personal front, boy, I hate getting old. I've told people for about a decade now, maybe more, but at least a decade, that when I was told I was an immortal, like a long time ago, they never said how much it would hurt and that you would get scarred and damaged. Wait a second. I'm an immortal. Yeah, you're going to live forever. It's going to hurt. Thanks. Well, I had a terrible weekend on the physical body front. Man, my right ankle that I crunched a long time ago. I have no cartilages left in there. Haven't had any since at least my early 40s. Late 30s, early 40s is when I was diagnosed with, you don't have any cartilage in there. Well, give me the lizard gene so I can grow some more. God, what's wrong with you people? Well, we haven't developed it yet. Well, why not? It is kind of funny, just on an aside, the people who will pump their bodies full of steroids and human growth hormone won't take a vaccine. Give me a break. Anyway, my ankle was just on fire to the point that it was really hard to walk. And people did suggest, well, get off it. Yeah, I'd like to. But in my life, it's not quite possible because there's too much to take care of and no one to take care of me. Well, I'm not whining, but right now I can't have anyone take care of me because I got too much to do. And we learn to work around things, don't we? Yes. Anyway, so I was in fairly uncomfortable mode for the weekend and limped around, and I have some like ointment, prescription grade ointment that is a topical that puts analgesic right to the tissue and where you need it the most. So I did use that. That helped. Ice packs helped. But man, it was bad. And then, of course, once you start favoring something, And I know the reason my ankle's all trash is because on my left knee where I had, I tore an ACL. Yeah. Knee injuries on both knees, multiple knee surgeries. Yeah, don't let your boys grow up to play football. Because if they grow up to play football, they've probably already been playing football and they're already damaged. They're only going to get damaged more. Well, that was another thing, is that, no one's going to tell you how bad. Actually, you know what? People did tell me, you're going to regret that when you're old. From those football injuries and other sports injuries, you're going to regret that when you're old. And I remember thinking, no, I won't. I'll have no regrets. Yikes. Yeah, that's a hard one to live up to. No regrets. Anyway, I was regretting that I don't have any cartilages, and I wonder why. In my ankle. Well, it wasn't just football. Jumping off 20-foot ledges when you're rock climbing, that kind of stuff. Just to show off. Not 20 foot. But 10 feet can hurt you. Still. That's why you don't see very many old rock climbers. They know what it's like to fall from 10 feet. No one is going to climb up 100 feet free climbing thinking, oh yeah, if I fall, I'll just roll. Yeah, you'll roll. So I had to work around all of the issues with my ankle. And also I should mention that I'm certain that there's arthritis in there, and the change in the weather had a lot to do with it. Because when we get to the weather report, I'll just give you a heads up. Looks like we have a forecast for snow tonight going into tomorrow. Well, winter is upon us. And so still have lots to do. The little dog, my mom's little Yorkie poo, Yorkshire poodle mix, she's a great little dog. She's a princess. Her name is Ginger because she used to be a little red dog, and now she's quite gray. But she's getting very old, and her hip is bad, and she wants to jump off my mother's bed. Now, we made my mom's bed lower so she can get out of it. But it's still fairly high for a little dog like that. And, she thinks she's a puppy at times, I guess. But she was hurting, and she's been having issues with ear infections, so I've been cleaning her ears out and trying to get those canals open some, because we're hoping that maybe she can hear, because she doesn't hear very well. There's a bit of concern about her going blind, losing some of her eyesight. I can tell a little bit by looking in her eye, and so she was somewhat of a three-legged dog herself during the weekend. And that made me quite sad. That's one of the reasons why I couldn't really stay off my ankle, because I had to carry that little thing out to do her thing. Now, she's quite content to hop around on her three legs, but just working on her and keeping her off of it and not letting her jump and, go down and upstairs too much. Little steps. We don't really have stairs here. But just kind of keeping her off of her hip. She seems to be using it a little bit more. She pushed off a little bit, but I was quite worried. I did an examination on her. She didn't yelp, so I was certain that she hadn't dislocated or broken anything, because she would have whimpered and shied away. And some animals will bite you. So there was none of that, and that made me a bit alleviated, but it also made me aware that her arthritis and whatnot is fairly severe. So maybe today, because we go to a checkup for little Ginger with the vet, and maybe he'll give her a cortisone shot, because she had a bit of an issue the last time we went in for her checkup, which wasn't long ago, because she's been dealing with skin and ear infection issues, and we're working on it. Yes, we are. So that's oh, wow, I just gave you a bunch of, maybe I violated HIPAA. Was there a third party involved? I don't think so, so we're okay. And what else was going on in the world? Boy, I don't know. I don't know about that Putin guy. We're going to talk about him at the chef's table as we go through the amuse-bouche of the world. The world only deserves a little kiss. And but anyway, what's up with Putin, man? I thought he was in negotiations with Germany for that pipeline. Is he like seeing how much he can pull, how much he can get away with? What a mobster. All right. And he said that it was so bad after the Soviet Union collapse, which he calls like a terrible historical event, because he was KGB. Let's not forget that. And now that he's a mobster, says everything you need to know about the KGB. But he said it was so bad that he had to drive a taxi. What's wrong with driving a taxi, you mobster? Yeah, I know. I was so little I had to drive a taxi. Yeah, well, so what? Some people wish they could attain the lofty heights of driving a taxi. What's wrong with you? Yeah, so much for... Yeah, he says that he hated the collapse of the Soviet Union, but here he is talking about class. It shouldn't matter to you. All right, well, that's all we need to know about Vlad. And should I add another personal note from the local area here? I don't know if I mentioned, Friday is a long time ago, but the totem pole that was taken down from the local public library here in town, because it turned out that the artist is not a Native American, and that he didn't really consult with any Native Americans when he made it. And I can understand a certain point, because he's kind of old like us. And he did this not recently, but not terribly long ago, like less than 10 years, I think. But it turned out that because I guess maybe the library and the board thought that he had some sort of Native American association, that they went ahead and put this up at the public library, and it had been there for quite a while. And then it was suddenly taken down, and it was explained by the artist and his wife, mostly his wife, what was going on, and that they were in negotiations to put it up somewhere else. Well, they did, and that somewhere else is the town museum, which is known as the Woodville Museum, because Rogue River used to be called Woodville, but no one was coming to Woodville. But maybe they'll come to the Rogue River. Yeah, they will, because there's a river right here called the Rogue River, and if you name a town after it, maybe they'll come here thinking that's where the headwaters of the Rogue River is. Actually, the headwaters are up by Crater Lake, but that's something else. So it got moved to the museum, and which I don't know. I guess, is it going to be a historical piece about? Well, I don't want to go too off on the artist, but it did concern me to a certain degree, because as artists, we are not supposed to appropriate other people's culture under the aegis that we know all about it. So if we want to make an artistic piece that is part of a culture, I would say, other than our own, we might want to talk to a few people about what certain things mean when we put those symbols up. Just saying that that's what it is. I had a translation of a poem title done in Japanese calligraphy, but it wasn't done by a Japanese. And I'll just let you know that my stepdad was an Issei. He's passed now. And he was my stepdad after I was already an adult and, whatever. But Tom was a great guy. Anyway, I asked him about it, and he said, that looks, he was trying to be polite, but he was basically saying it's uneducated. You can tell no Japanese did that. So I asked him if he would do it, and he did. So it made me aware that good intentions are not enough. good intentions about what you are doing in terms of a message in a language or a culture other than our own, the intentions are not good enough because it can still be highly offensive. But of course, here in Rogue River, oh no, we want our lawn jockeys. All these pansies want to take our lawn jockeys away. That's essentially what their argument is. They don't understand the insulting aspect of the black lawn jockey. So they don't understand why it would be that anyone would want to take our totem pole down. Well, I posted a little blurb about cultural appropriation and what it means in art and to indigenous people here on the West Coast, and the use of West Coast imagery, specifically totems. Actually, it was other arts and crafts, but we'll get into that because we have that coming up here in the Bistro Cafe. But it's all part of a whole. And when I did come across this article that we're going to go through in the Bistro Cafe today, it made me aware why the librarian said that we really can't have this here. Because it's getting real, folks. And as we know here in Rogue River, as I've mentioned before, that one of the reasons indigenous people don't make a big brouhaha over this totem is because they were almost annihilated within the memories of some people who knew their grandparents who told them about it. Genocided the Native American population in this region to take the land so they could go for whatever it was, silver, copper, whatnot in the rivers. Just they knew that it was bad. And everything else, the land, the property. And even more recently, we had a Black Lives Matter representative of a group here in Southern Oregon, the Southern Oregon Equality Coalition, is that how it is? Who was invited by our city to give a talk on systemic racism and racism in general at our Thursday workshop. The city invited her. And the police chief at the time made it so uncomfortable she left and had to leave her home because she was being harassed. And then to make amends, they thought they would put together with some people here who are more rational-minded in our town. We'll have a little picnic and we'll talk about it. So they got a permit to go have the picnic at the little Palmerton Arboretum Park. And the police chief found out about it and said, no, we got to get somebody else to get that permit. And they got the permit. So then when there was nowhere to have hamburgers and hot dogs and talk to each other, because people were at the city hall to get the permits to find out where they're going to go, and maybe they'll go to somebody's private property, they couldn't go there because they were being harassed. Almost 200 biker types showed up and stood across the street from City Hall, where this woman and about 20 other people were, to have a picnic. Stood across, revving their engines, driving their maggot giant monster Trump maggot trucks with the big flags, the Trump flags and the American flags, up and down the little avenue there in front of City Hall and the Ace Hardware. That was the response. So you can imagine what I am going through because I mentioned the fact that maybe cultural appropriation is not a good thing. Good intentions are not enough. So I'm Beelzebub, apparently. I work for the devil. No, I don't. All right. Anyway, that's what is going on around these parts. What's going on in the rest of the world? Well, I've given away the story mostly here at the top. Oh, yeah, Meadows' emails before the insurrection revealed that the National Guard was ready to protect the pro-Trump people. Maybe. Some National Guards were, I bet. Then on the rest of the menu, a federal watchdog found that a special Customs and Border Protection unit used sensitive government databases to investigate journalists. That's against the law. 2 artists are facing federal charges that they faked Native American heritage to sell Indian arts and crafts at downtown Seattle galleries. Now, the artist who did this totem in town never purported to be Native American, but nobody asked either. And a Navy commander was fired after refusing to get the COVID vaccine or be tested. Well, I guess he's finding out now. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the G7 warned Russia of massive consequences if they invade Ukraine. I don't know. Has he invaded already? He might have. And satellite images appear to show that Iran is preparing for a space launch. Well, if Elon Musk and Bezos can do it, why can't they? All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Where did the time go? That rant went exceedingly long, did it not? Well, that's the way it is. It's Monday. That's my excuse. Anyway, you all know that the chat room is where the link for that is on our homepage, at the bottom of our homepage, and that Kelly takes care of it. And you all know that we need funds, and you know where that link is at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com also. And you know to follow Netroots Radio at Netroots Radio, and Tom takes care of that. And follow me at Justice Putnam, because of the show notes and links diary I link up from Daily Co's on Twitter, and that the show is on Twitter at Cookbook West, and podcasts are found where you find podcasts. All right. So let's get into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and it is out of the Associated Press by Mark Sherman. A special Customs and Border Protection unit used sensitive government databases intended to track terrorists to investigate as many as 20 U.S.-based journalists, including a Pulitzer Prize-winning AP reporter, according to a federal watchdog. Yahoo News, which published an extensive report on the investigation, also found that the unit, the Counter-Network Division, queried records of congressional staffers and perhaps members of Congress. Jeffrey Rambo. Wait a second. Are you serious? Rambo? An agent who acknowledged running checks on journalists in 2017, I wonder who was president then, told federal investigators the practice is routine. When a name comes across your desk, you run it through every system you have access to. That's just status quo. That's what everyone does, Rambo was quoted by Yahoo News as saying. Really now? I was wondering why I had so many supposed law enforcement types in my timeline during Malheur. You know, when the Bundys took over the little wildlife, it's not little, but the wildlife sanctuary, because they were upset that federal charges had been brought against some ranchers who had burned down a forest to cover up the poaching illegal. Well, poaching is illegal by the fact it's poaching, but they tried to poach elk and deer, and then they burned down a forest to cover up their tracks. You know, property rights, except it was on federal property. So the AP obtained a redacted copy of a more than 500-page report by the Homeland Security Department's Inspector General that included the same statement, but with the speaker's name blacked out. The Border Protection Agency is part of Homeland Security. The revelation raised alarm in news organizations and prompted a demand for a full explanation. We are deeply concerned about this apparent abuse of power, Lauren Easton, AP's Director of Media Relations, said in a statement. This appears to be an example of journalists being targeted for simply doing their jobs, which is a violation of the First Amendment. Yeah, well, the Second Amendment's got the First Amendment held up with a gun, front and back. In its own statement, Custom and Border Protection did not specifically address the investigation, but said, CBP vetting and investigatory operations, including those conducted by the Counter-Network Division, are strictly governed by well-established protocols and best practices. CBP does not investigate individuals without a legitimate and legal basis to do so. Oh, yeah? Journalists? An employee at Storymakers Coffee Roasters, a small storefront shop Rambo owns in San Diego's Barrio Logan neighborhood, said Saturday that Rambo was not immediately available to comment. He lives in San Diego. The new disclosures are just the latest example of federal agencies using their power to examine the contacts of journalists and others. Earlier this year, Attorney General Merrick Garland formally prohibited prosecutors from seizing the records of journalists in leak investigations, with limited exceptions, reversing years of department policy. That action came after an outcry over revelations that the Trump Justice Department had obtained records belonging to journalists as well as Democratic members of Congress and their aides, and a former White House counsel, Don McGahn. Johnson of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Ash Mondays. Two artists are facing federal charges that they faked Native American heritage to sell works at downtown Seattle galleries. Louis Anthony Rath of Maple Falls and Jerry Chris Van Dyke, 67, also known as Jerry Witten of Seattle, have been charged separately with violating the Indian Arts and Crafts Act, which prohibits misrepresentation in marketing American Indian or Alaska Native arts and crafts. The U.S. Attorney's Office said Rath falsely claimed to be a member of the San Carlos Apache tribe, and Van Dyke falsely claimed membership in the Nez Perce tribe. The goods included masks, totem poles, and pendants sold in 2019 at Raven's Nest Treasure in Pike's Place Market and at Ye Old Curiosity Shop on the waterfront. By flooding the market with counterfeit Native American art and craft work, these crimes cheat the consumer, undermine the economic livelihood of Native American artists, and impair Indian culture, Edward Grace, Assistant Director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service of Law Enforcement, said in a news release. Rath and Van Dyke were due to appear in U.S. District Court on Friday. Their attorneys, federal public defenders Gregory Geist and Vanessa Pye Thompson, said in an email they did not have immediate comment on the charges. Authorities said the investigation began when the Indian Arts and Crafts Board, an Interior Department agency that promotes Native art, received complaints that the two were fraudulently holding themselves out as enrolled tribal members. Rath is charged with 4 counts of misrepresentation of Indian-produced goods, which is punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Van Dyke faces 2 counts of the same crime. Rita C. Baldor of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Navy commander has been fired from his job as the executive officer of a warship because he refused to get a COVID-19 vaccine as required and refused to be tested for the virus. Commander Lucian Kins was relieved of his duties on Friday as second-in-command of the USS Winston Churchill, a destroyer, by Navy Captain Ken Anderson, commander of Naval Surface Squadron 14. Officials said Kins was the first naval officer to be fired as a result of a vaccine refusal. There's always got to be a first. A Navy spokesman, Lieutenant Commander Jason Fisher, declined to give the precise reasons why Kins was relieved of command, citing privacy concerns. Fisher, who is spokesman for the Naval Surface Force Atlantic, said the reason for the firing was that Anderson lost confidence in Kins' ability to perform his duties after he failed to obey a lawful order. Other officials, however, said it was because Kins refused the order to get the vaccine and refused testing to ensure he did not have the virus. Well, I would question that leader's leadership abilities, wouldn't we all? Okay, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, it's going to be short, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, a care package. If you're the type of person who doesn't get musicals, I probably have to tell you who Jonathan Larson was. Jonathan Larson wrote Rent, wrote the cultural event that swirled around art, millennials, and AIDS that exploded in the 1990s. And because the universe does not care about us, Larson died of a cardiac malfunction before he even saw his show open. Now, before Rent, Larson wrote and performed a monologue with songs with just him, a piano, and a band, dealing with his anxiety about turning 30 before having achieved any professional success. He called it Tick, Tick, Boom. So after Rent, in mourning for the man who seemed to have been poised to become the future of musical theater, people reworked Tick, Tick, Boom into a 3-person, 3-act show. And what we have now is Lin-Manuel Miranda, musical theater's new savior, making his directorial debut with his film adaptation. So, 3 things about Miranda's Tick, Tick, Boom. 1, Miranda hits it out of the park. He understands that even though movies bathe in realism, movie musicals can't, because musicals themselves aren't realistic. So from jump, Miranda shows us from the editing style to moments of visual magic that we're watching a filmic construction. And speaking of editing, Tick, Tick, Boom has 2 great editors, Andrew Weissblum, until he had to go back to work with Darren Aronofsky, and Myron Kirstein, who edited In the Heights. And Miranda himself said that his skills as a composer, knowing tension and release, feeling when to slow down and when to move along, helped prepare him to work with those 2. 3, Andrew Garfield holds the center of this film with a stunningly expressive performance. I mean, he sells the songs, sells them as top-shelf goods. You're drawn to his John Larson. You root for his John Larson. You love his John Larson. Tick, Tick, Boom benefits from the collection of the right people. Miranda cares about Broadway, cares about musical theater, cares about Jonathan Larson, and thus helps us care about his story. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com,
Show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
What does your toothbrush, a fish dinner, and your running shoes have in common? Plastic. We now live on planet plastic. Billions of tons of waste from everyday products made of these chemical contaminants are strewn literally everywhere, on the highest mountaintops, into the deepest seabeds, in dense tropical jungles, and all across barren deserts. It's estimated, for example, that in less than 30 years, the gross volume of discarded plastic in our oceans will outnumber fish. From grocery carry-out bags to shower curtains to almost invisible bits of microplastics, the vast tonnage of this trash increases every minute, with an afterlife lasting centuries, wreaking havoc on ecosystems, destroying species, and infusing our water, air, soil, food, and us. Consider just two common products, your toothbrush and your sneakers. Until the 1930s, toothbrushes were made of degradable natural components. Since then, practically all have been throwaway plastic brushes. But there is no away, so nearly all of the trillions of brushes we've discarded in the past century are still out there, somewhere on the land or in our water. Moving from your teeth to your feet, consider that millions of sneakers are sold in the U.S. each year, advertised as being athletic and cool. What's uncool is that they're made almost entirely of melded and molded plastics that are practically impossible to recycle. So, after a short time in our closets, sneakers spend an eternity as globs of toxic plastic trash. This is Jim Hightower saying, we're being choked by our own synthetic waste, from billions of plastic bottles and cigarette filters to tons of straws and synthetic rubber tires. To help stop the insanity, contact Beyond Plastics, beyondplastics.org.
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. Unlike the American Constitution, the British Constitution is not entirely written down. Instead, the British Constitution is composed of common law, acts of Parliament, court decisions, and long-established practices and traditions. 3 documents play a very important role in the British Constitution. These are the Magna Carta of 1215, the Petition of Right of 1628, and the English Bill of Rights of 1689. The Magna Carta established that there were limits to the king's power and spelled out some of the basic rights of Englishmen. The Magna Carta reinforced the idea that Britain was a country governed by the rule of law. The Petition of Right of 1628 referred to the Magna Carta as the basis for its legitimacy. Like so many conflicts between the king and Parliament, the Petition of Right came about because the king tried to pressure his subjects for money without the consent of Parliament. This led to Parliament forcing King Charles I to agree to the Petition of Right, which stated, among other things, that the king could raise taxes only with the consent of Parliament. Finally, the Bill of Rights of 1689 established parliamentary privilege, which meant that Parliament would meet frequently, would have free elections of members of the House of Commons, and would have freedom of speech within Parliament. Other protections included the guarantee against cruel and unusual punishment, and the right to fair treatment by the courts. These protections influenced the American Bill of Rights, which was ratified a little more than 100 years later, in 1791. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1903. That was the day prominent civil rights activist Ella Baker was born in Norfolk, Virginia. Her parents moved to Littleton, North Carolina when she was young. She often listened to her grandmother's stories of slave revolts and of the brutality she endured under slavery. Ella attended the historically black college Shaw University, graduating in 1927. After college, she moved to New York City and worked as a journalist. Ella was profoundly impacted by the Harlem Renaissance and became an educator for the WPA, teaching African and labor history. She immersed herself in the activism of the period and worked on the Scottsboro Boys Defense Campaign. By 1938, she had joined the NAACP, traveling across the country to direct membership recruitment, fundraising, and building of local branches. In 1952, Ella became president of New York City's NAACP chapter, working for desegregation and on police brutality cases. Baker went to Alabama to help found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference after the successful Montgomery bus boycott to organize voter registration drives throughout the South. From there, she formed and led the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Ella trained young, committed civil rights activists in a collectivist model of organizing and in participatory democracy. By 1964, she helped to organize the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party and its fight to become seated at the 1964 Democratic National Convention. She was involved in the defense of activist and friend Ann Braden, then targeted by HUAC, and later the Free Angelina movement in defense of then-jailed activist Angelina Davis. She was instrumental in the founding of the Third World Women's Alliance and supported various independence movements throughout the world. She died on her birthday in 1986.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 37 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of only 40. And we are in a winter advisory right now. We will have a wintry mix throughout the day. Rain and snow, that's been upgraded from only rain to rain and snow. Steady rain this morning, tapering to showers, becoming mixed with snow for the afternoon. Temps nearly steady in the upper 30s, winds out of the southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And it looks like cloudy with rain and snow diminishing this evening, lows in the upper 20s. Partial clearing overnight, winds light and variable. Then partly cloudy tomorrow with highs near 40, winds light and variable. We do not have an update on coronavirus infections in Jackson County. They remain what they were on Friday. We'll give an update tomorrow. Pollen is rated as none outside the window in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good at 26 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at level 1. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.44 inches. Visibility is down to 1.5 miles, which is 1.5 miles, and relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. I'll get it out. London is 52 and cloudy. Paris is 46 and cloudy. Rome is 55 and sunny. Kyiv is 33 with a light drizzle. Kabul is 34 degrees and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 60 and fair. Tokyo is 43 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 64 and clear. San Francisco, California is 51 degrees with rain, and they're going to get a lot of it. And New York, New York is a crisp 45 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Jill Lawless of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The group of 7 economic powers told Russia yesterday, Sunday, to de-escalate its military buildup near the Ukrainian border, warning that an invasion would have, quote, massive consequences and inflict severe economic pain on Moscow. Foreign ministers from the U.S., Britain, and the rest of the G7, joined by the EU's foreign affairs chief, issued a joint statement declaring themselves, quote, united in our condemnation of Russia's military buildup and aggressive rhetoric towards Ukraine, end quote. The G7 called on Russia to de-escalate, pursue diplomatic channels, and abide by its international commitments on transparency of military activities, and praised Ukraine's restraint.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
John Gambrell of the AP brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Iran appears to be preparing for a space launch as negotiations continue in Vienna over its tattered nuclear deal with world powers, according to an expert, and satellite images. The likely blast-off at Iran's Imam Khomeini spaceport comes as Iranian state media has offered a list of upcoming planned satellite launches in the works for the Islamic Republican civilian space program, which has been beset by a series of failed launches. Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard runs its own parallel program that successfully put a satellite into orbit last year. Conducting a launch amid the Vienna talks fits the hardline posture struck by Tehran's negotiators, who already described 6 previous rounds of diplomacy as a draft, exasperating Western nations. Germany's new foreign minister has gone as far as to warn that time is running out for us at this point. But all this fits into a renewed focus on space by Iran's hardline president, Raisi, said Jeffrey Lewis, an expert at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies, who studies Tehran's program. With Iran's former President Rouhani, who shepherded the nuclear deal out of office, concerns about alienating the talks with launches that the U.S. asserts aids Tehran's ballistic missile program likely have faded. Iranian state media did not acknowledge the activity at the spaceport, and Iran's mission to the UN did not respond to a request for comment. The U.S. military, which tracks space launches, also did not respond to requests for comment. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we're going to meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.